Your person is shaking in total shock right now. They lost all control after finding out you are. Don't scroll, listen to this. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because if this title stopped you, it's not curiosity, it's resonance. It's the universe tapping you on the shoulder saying pay attention, and listen closely, because somewhere right now, the person connected to you just experienced a moment that knocked the air out of their chest, a realization so sudden it disrupted their emotional balance. And don't scroll, listen to this, because what they found out about you wasn't small, it wasn't surface level, it wasn't gossip or coincidence, it was truth, and your heart needs this right now, because while you were quietly healing, growing, detaching, and stepping into your power, they were still holding an outdated version of you in their mind. And listen carefully, because when reality finally caught up, it shook them. And don't scroll, listen to this, because the shock wasn't about jealousy alone. It was about recognition, the kind that hits when someone realizes they misjudged your depth, your strength, your value, and your spiritual evolution, and your heart needs this right now, because you didn't announce your transformation, you embodied it. And listen closely, because embodied growth is the kind that destabilizes people who thought they had you figured out. And don't scroll, listen to this, because what sent them spiraling was discovering that you are no longer who they could predict, control, or keep at arm's length, and your heart needs this right now, because unpredictability rooted in self-worth is powerful. And listen carefully, because this isn't about revenge or validation, it's about alignment. And don't scroll, listen to this, because alignment changes the energetic dynamic without a single word being spoken. And your heart needs this right now, because the universe has been preparing you for this moment longer than you realize. And listen closely, because the signs were already there, angel numbers appearing when you questioned yourself. 11 showing up when you wondered if you were seen, 333 appearing when you were pushed to speak your truth or finally stay silent. And don't scroll, listen to this, because those numbers weren't promises, they were confirmations that your soul was waking up. And your heart needs this right now, because spiritual awakening doesn't just change you, it sends shockwaves through every soul contract connected to you. And listen carefully, because this person felt that wave, suddenly, unexpectedly, like standing too close when the ground shifts beneath you. And don't scroll, listen to this, because they lost control, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something right. You chose yourself, and your heart needs this right now, because choosing yourself rewrites power dynamics. And listen closely, because power doesn't always look loud, sometimes it looks like calm, boundaries, silence, and emotional stability. And don't scroll, listen to this, because emotional stability is terrifying to someone who relied on your emotional availability without accountability. And your heart needs this right now, because you stopped feeding the dynamic that kept them comfortable. And listen carefully, because comfort breeds complacency, and complacency collapses when growth enters the room. And don't scroll, listen to this, because growth walked in quietly through you. And your heart needs this right now, because you may have felt moments recently where memories resurfaced, dreams felt vivid, or emotions hit you out of nowhere. And listen closely, because that wasn't random, that was energetic recognition traveling both ways. And don't scroll, listen to this, because soul connections don't sever instantly, they recalibrate. And your heart needs this right now, because recalibration feels intense on the side that didn't initiate growth. And listen carefully, because you initiated growth when you chose healing over chasing, clarity over confusion, and peace over potential. And don't scroll, listen to this, because peace is what tipped the scales, and your heart needs this right now because peaceful energy is destabilizing to someone used to chaos or control, and listen closely, because they are now questioning everything, their choices, their timing, their assumptions, and don't scroll, listen to this, because shock often comes right before truth demands action. And your heart needs this right now because whether they act or not is no longer your responsibility. And listen carefully, because responsibility shifted the moment you stopped abandoning yourself, and don't scroll, listen to this, because self-abandonment kept you tethered to outcomes that drained you, and your heart needs this right now because you release that cord, and listen closely, because release doesn't mean disconnection, it means neutrality, and neutrality is powerful, and don't scroll, listen to this. Because neutrality allows the universe to step in without interference, and your heart needs this right now because divine timing only works when you stop forcing results, and listen carefully, because what's happening now is not punishment or reward, it's balance, and don't scroll, listen to this, because balance is why they feel shaken and you feel steadier. And your heart needs this right now because steadiness is the sign of alignment, and listen closely, because you may notice that even knowing they are shaken doesn't inflate your ego or pull you back into old patterns, and don't scroll, listen to this, because that neutrality is growth confirmed, and your heart needs this right now because growth doesn't seek validation, it simply exists, and listen carefully. Because the universe is watching how you hold yourself now, not to test you, but to reinforce the new standard you've set, and don't scroll, listen to this, because standards are spiritual boundaries. And your heart needs this right now because you no longer tolerate emotional confusion disguised as depth, and listen closely, because depth now feels like honesty, consistency, and presence. And don't scroll, listen to this, because anything less will feel immediately misaligned to you, and your heart needs this right now because alignment protects your future, and listen carefully, because this shock they're experiencing is not a call for you to rescue, explain, or soften yourself. It's simply evidence that your evolution is real, and don't scroll, listen to this, because evolution doesn't ask permission, it happens when the soul is ready, and your heart needs this right now because you were ready, and listen closely, because whether this leads to communication, closure, or complete release will unfold naturally, without force, and don't scroll, listen to this, because forcing would pull you backward, and your heart needs this right now because backward is no longer available to you, and listen carefully. Because the cliffhanger here is not what they do next. It's what you choose next, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you are standing at a threshold where alignment will reward self-trust, and your heart needs this right now because self-trust is the frequency that attracts what is meant to stay, and listen closely, because the universe didn't wake you up, level you up, and protect you just to send you back into confusion. And don't scroll, listen to this, because what comes next will feel calmer, clearer, and undeniably real, and your heart needs this right now because this moment was never about them losing control, it was about you finally gaining yours, and that changes everything. Don't scroll, listen to this message is for you. And your heart needs this right now because this is the part where the shock settles and the truth behind it becomes impossible to ignore, and listen closely because what they are experiencing now isn't just surprise, it's a deep internal unraveling, the kind that happens when someone realizes they misread the situation for far too long, and don't scroll, listen to this, because while you were quietly stepping into your power, releasing attachments, and choosing peace over emotional chaos, they were still holding on to an outdated version of you that no longer exists, and your heart needs this right now because realizing someone has outgrown the role you assigned them is destabilizing, and listen carefully, because that's why they feel like they lost control, not because you did something dramatic, but because you did something silent and irreversible. You changed internally. And don't scroll, listen to this, because internal change is the kind that sends shockwaves through soul connections without warning, and your heart needs this right now because you didn't announce your growth, you didn't seek permission, you didn't explain yourself, you simply became. And listen closely, because becoming doesn't ask for validation, it shifts the entire dynamic automatically. And don't scroll, listen to this. Because the universe has been guiding you through a spiritual awakening that altered your frequency, and your heart needs this right now because frequency determines access. And listen carefully, because access to you is no longer automatic, it's intentional. And don't scroll, listen to this, because they felt that change the moment they realized you were no longer emotionally available in the same way, not withdrawn, not cold, but centered. And your heart needs this right now because centered energy cannot be controlled, predicted, or taken for granted. And listen closely, because that loss of control is what rattled them most, not jealousy, not competition, but the realization that you are no longer waiting, chasing, or holding space for uncertainty. And don't scroll, listen to this, because uncertainty was the cushion that kept them comfortable, and your heart needs this right now because comfort collapses when clarity enters. And listen carefully, because clarity doesn't need confrontation, it radiates. And don't scroll, listen to this, because you radiated clarity through boundaries, through silence where you once explained, through peace where you once overthought. And your heart needs this right now because that peace is magnetic and intimidating at the same time. And listen closely, because intimidating energy is often mistaken for arrogance, when in reality it's self-respect. And don't scroll, listen to this, because self-respect is the one thing that forces others to face themselves. And your heart needs this right now because they are facing themselves now, questioning why they hesitated, why they assumed you'd always be there, why they underestimated the depth of your growth. And listen carefully, because regret doesn't always show up as apology, sometimes it shows up as panic, restlessness, and emotional spiraling. And don't scroll, listen to this, because spiraling is what happens when someone realizes the power dynamic has shifted out of their favor. And your heart needs this right now because you didn't shift the dynamic to punish anyone, you shifted it to protect your soul. And listen closely, because protection is what your higher self demanded. And don't scroll, listen to this, because higher self decisions often look cold to people who benefited from your lower self patterns. And your heart needs this right now because you are no longer responsible for making others comfortable at the expense of your peace. And listen carefully, because peace is what you chose when you stopped overextending emotionally, stopped waiting for mixed signals to make sense, and stopped romanticizing potential over reality. And don't scroll, listen to this, because reality has weight. And your heart needs this right now because reality is what finally hit them. And listen closely, because they realized you are no longer accessible through confusion, nostalgia, or emotional shortcuts. And don't scroll, listen to this, because access now requires intention, accountability, and presence. And your heart needs this right now because you raised the energetic standard without saying a word. And listen carefully, because that's what spiritual awakening looks like: quiet authority, grounded confidence, and emotional regulation. And don't scroll, listen to this, because emotional regulation is what shakes people who relied on your emotional reactions. And your heart needs this right now because you no longer react the way you used to. And listen closely, Because non-reactivity is power, and don't scroll, listen to this, because power doesn't chase, explain, or prove itself, and your heart needs this right now because you stopped proving yourself a long time ago, and listen carefully, because that's when the universe stepped in to rearrange the dynamic, and don't scroll, listen to this, because the universe responds when someone finally chooses alignment over attachment, and your heart needs this right now because attachment once kept you emotionally tethered to outcomes that drained you. And listen closely, because you released that tether, and don't scroll, listen to this, because release doesn't mean you stopped caring, it means you stopped sacrificing yourself, and your heart needs this right now because sacrifice disguised as love is still self-betrayal, and listen carefully, because self-betrayal kept you stuck in cycles that felt intense but went nowhere, and don't scroll, listen to this, because intensity without growth is not love, it's stagnation, and your heart needs this right now because you chose growth. And listen closely, because growth always triggers a reckoning in those who resisted it, and don't scroll, listen to this, because their shock is not evidence that you did something wrong, it's evidence that you did something right, and your heart needs this right now because you might feel tempted to soften, to explain, to reassure, to make things easier for them, and listen carefully, because that impulse comes from the old version of you, the one who prioritized harmony over truth, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you don't live there anymore, and your heart needs this right now because your nervous system knows the difference between peace and people-pleasing, and listen closely, because peace doesn't require you to dim your light, and don't scroll, listen to this, because your light is what exposed the imbalance, and your heart needs this right now because imbalance cannot survive in the presence of clarity, and listen carefully, because clarity doesn't demand a response, it allows one, and don't scroll, listen to this, because whatever response comes next, if it comes at all, will not define your worth, and your heart needs this right now because worth is no longer something you negotiate, and listen closely, because you are no longer waiting for someone to catch up to you energetically, you are moving forward in alignment, and don't scroll, listen to this, because alignment doesn't rush, it unfolds, and your heart needs this right now because unfolding allows the universe to deliver outcomes cleanly, without emotional debris, and listen carefully, because clean outcomes don't leave you questioning yourself, they leave you grounded, and don't scroll, listen to this, because grounded is how you feel now, even as this shock ripples through the connection, and your heart needs this right now because grounded energy is unshakable, and listen closely, because the cliffhanger here isn't whether they regain control, it's whether you ever give yours up again, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you won't, not after everything you've learned, healed, and embodied, and your heart needs this right now because the universe didn't elevate you just to watch you shrink, and listen carefully, because what comes next will not be driven by urgency, fear, or reaction, it will be guided by truth, alignment, and self-respect, and don't scroll, listen to this, because that is the real shift that shook them, and that is the power you now hold, quietly, steadily, and permanently. Don't scroll, listen to this message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because this is the stage where the aftershock becomes undeniable, where the realization they had doesn't fade but deepens, and listen closely because what they're experiencing now isn't just emotional turbulence, it's a reckoning with truth, the kind that happens when someone realizes they no longer recognize the role they once played in your life. And don't scroll, listen to this, because that loss of control wasn't momentary, it triggered a cascade of awareness that keeps replaying in their mind, and your heart needs this right now because awareness doesn't knock once, it echoes, and listen carefully, because every echo is reminding them that you are not who you used to be, not energetically, not emotionally, not spiritually, and don't scroll, listen to this, because the version of you they could rely on to be available, patient, understanding, and forgiving without boundaries has quietly stepped aside, and your heart needs this right now because that version carried you through lessons, not destinations, and listen closely, because lessons end when awareness integrates, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you integrated, and integration changes everything without asking permission, and your heart needs this right now because integration doesn't seek validation, it restructures dynamics automatically. And listen carefully, because this restructuring is what they are struggling to process, the sudden understanding that they no longer have access to you in the same way, and don't scroll, listen to this, because access is not entitlement, it's alignment, and your heart needs this right now because alignment now governs who can reach you emotionally, and listen closely, because that realization stripped them of the illusion of control they didn't even know they were holding, and don't scroll, listen to this, because illusions collapse when truth enters the room, and your heart needs this right now because truth entered through your silence, your boundaries, your calm, and your refusal to chase what wasn't meeting you halfway, and listen carefully, because refusing to chase doesn't mean you stopped caring, it means you started respecting yourself, and don't scroll, listen to this, because self-respect is destabilizing to anyone who benefited from your self-sacrifice. And your heart needs this right now because self-sacrifice disguised as love is still self-abandonment, and listen closely, because you stopped abandoning yourself, and don't scroll, listen to this, because that single decision rewrote the energetic contract between you and them, and your heart needs this right now because contracts don't end loudly, they expire quietly when the terms are no longer met, and listen carefully, because they felt the expiration before they understood it, and don't scroll, listen to this, because expiration feels like panic when someone realizes the familiar dynamic no longer exists, and your heart needs this right now because panic is not your responsibility, and listen closely, because your responsibility is to remain aligned with who you've become, not to soothe someone else's discomfort with your growth, and don't scroll, listen to this, because growth is not negotiable once the soul commits to it, and your heart needs this right now because your soul committed fully. And listen carefully, because spiritual awakening doesn't ask if others are ready, it moves when you are, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you were ready when you chose peace over proving, presence over performing, and clarity over confusion, and your heart needs this right now because those choices recalibrated your nervous system, and listen closely, because a regulated nervous system no longer responds to emotional hooks the same way, and don't scroll, listen to this, because that's why you didn't react when you once would have. You didn't explain when you once would have over-explained, and your heart needs this right now because non-reactivity is not indifference, it's mastery, and listen carefully, because mastery doesn't need to announce itself, it simply changes outcomes, and don't scroll, listen to this, because outcomes are shifting now whether anyone speaks or not, and your heart needs this right now because the universe is balancing what was once uneven, and listen closely, because balance feels unsettling to the side that benefited from imbalance, and don't scroll, listen to this, because their shock is not a sign you should step backward, it's a sign you stepped forward, and your heart needs this right now because stepping forward often feels lonely before it feels liberating, and listen carefully, because liberation doesn't come with applause, it comes with peace, and don't scroll, listen to this. Because peace is what you're feeling now beneath the awareness of their reaction, and your heart needs this right now because peace confirms alignment, and listen closely, because alignment does not require anyone else's approval to remain intact, and don't scroll, listen to this, because approval seeking once kept you emotionally tethered to outcomes you couldn't control, and your heart needs this right now because you released that tether, and listen carefully, because releasing doesn't mean severing love, it means releasing fear. And don't scroll, listen to this, because fear was the only thing keeping the old dynamic alive, and your heart needs this right now because fear no longer dictates your choices, and listen closely, because courage does, the quiet kind that chooses truth even when it's uncomfortable, and don't scroll, listen to this, because truth is uncomfortable only to the ego, not the soul. And your heart needs this right now because your soul has been craving this honesty for a long time, and listen carefully, because honesty doesn't always bring reunion. Sometimes it brings clarity so clean that you no longer feel pulled in opposing directions, and don't scroll, listen to this, because clarity is arriving now whether through conversation, silence, or inner knowing. And your heart needs this right now because inner knowing is stronger than external confirmation, and listen closely, because you don't need them to admit they're shaken to know your growth is real, and don't scroll, listen to this, because your body already knows, your calm already knows, your boundaries already know, and your heart needs this right now because those are signs of integration, not detachment. And listen carefully, because detachment numbs, but integration stabilizes, and don't scroll, listen to this, because stability is what allows you to stay open without losing yourself, and your heart needs this right now because openness once cost you peace, and listen closely, because now openness is grounded in self-trust, and don't scroll, listen to this, because self-trust is what prevents you from being pulled back into old cycles by someone else's emotional reaction, and your heart needs this right now because cycles only repeat when awareness is ignored, and listen carefully, because you are not ignoring anything anymore, you are fully present, and don't scroll, listen to this, because presence allows the universe to complete what it started without interference. And your heart needs this right now because interference often comes from guilt, obligation, or the urge to fix what isn't yours to fix, and listen closely, because you don't feel that urge the same way anymore, and don't scroll, listen to this, because that's growth confirmed, and your heart needs this right now because growth isn't measured by how others react, it's measured by how you respond, and listen carefully. Because your response now is calm curiosity instead of emotional urgency, and don't scroll, listen to this, because urgency once felt like love, but now it feels like imbalance, and your heart needs this right now because you recognize the difference, and listen closely, because recognizing the difference is what keeps you from romanticizing someone else's panic as proof of love, and don't scroll, listen to this, because panic is not devotion, it's fear of loss, and your heart needs this right now because love rooted in fear cannot sustain alignment, and listen carefully, because alignment requires choice, presence, and accountability, not shock. Alone, and don't scroll, listen to this, because whatever they choose next will reveal whether they can meet you where you stand now, and your heart needs this right now because you are not here to drag anyone forward, and listen closely, because dragging creates resentment, not connection, and don't scroll, listen to this, because connection now must be mutual or it won't be at all, and your heart needs this right now because you value mutuality more than intensity, and listen carefully. Because intensity without reciprocity once kept you stuck, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you are not stuck anymore, and your heart needs this right now because movement is happening even if it's quiet, and listen closely, because quiet movement is often the most permanent kind, and don't scroll, listen to this, because permanence doesn't announce itself with drama, it settles with certainty. And your heart needs this right now because certainty feels like knowing you'll be okay. Regardless of what happens next, and listen carefully, because that knowing is power, and don't scroll, listen to this, because power does not need to be used to be effective, it simply is, and your heart needs this right now because you are holding that power now, not over anyone else, but over your own choices. And listen closely, because the cliffhanger here is not whether they recover from their shock. It's whether you continue to honor your alignment without guilt, and don't scroll, listen to this, because guilt is the last hook of the old dynamic, and your heart needs this right now because you are no longer available for hooks, only for truth, and listen carefully, because truth will guide whatever comes next cleanly, whether it's reconnection on new terms, closure that brings peace, or complete release that opens the door to something more aligned. And don't scroll, listen to this, because no matter the outcome, you are not losing anything meant for you, you are stepping fully into what is, and your heart needs this right now because stepping into truth is always the right direction, and the universe is walking with you through this, steady, calm, and exact, ensuring that what remains in your life can meet you where you are now, not where you used to be, and that is the real transformation that shook them, and the real stability that now belongs to you. Don't scroll, listen to this message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because this is the phase where the energy fully reorients, where what once felt like shock on their side and calm on yours becomes a clear dividing line between who you were and who you are now. And listen closely because this is where the universe asks you to stay anchored while everything finishes rearranging itself. And don't scroll, listen to this, because rearrangement can feel quiet on the outside, while it's seismic underneath. And your heart needs this right now because you might sense moments of stillness followed by sudden insight, clarity arriving without effort, emotions surfacing and dissolving quickly instead of lingering, and listen carefully, because that's integration happening in real time. And don't scroll, listen to this, because integration is the moment when lessons stop hurting and start making sense. And your heart needs this right now because sense brings peace, and listen closely, because peace is what you're learning to trust instead of intensity. And don't scroll, listen to this, because intensity once convinced you something was meaningful even when it wasn't healthy, and your heart needs this right now because health now feels like consistency, honesty, and emotional safety. And listen carefully, because emotional safety doesn't excite the ego, it soothes the nervous system. And don't scroll, listen to this, because your nervous system has finally learned what safety feels like, and your heart needs this right now because once safety is recognized, chaos loses its appeal. And listen closely, because chaos is what kept the old dynamic alive. And don't scroll, listen to this, because without chaos, the imbalance is exposed, and your heart needs this right now because imbalance cannot hide behind passion anymore. And listen carefully, because that's why they feel shaken now. Not because you did something sudden, but because you stopped participating in what kept the dynamic predictable. And don't scroll, listen to this, because predictability rooted in imbalance feels like control. And your heart needs this right now because control dissolves when someone becomes self-directed. And listen closely, because you became self-directed the moment you stopped outsourcing your worth, your peace, and your direction to someone else's behavior. And don't scroll, listen to this, because that decision was the true turning point, and your Heart needs this right now because from that moment on, the universe could finally move things without resistance, and listen carefully, because resistance often shows up as waiting, hoping, or trying to interpret someone else's actions instead of listening to your own inner knowing. And don't scroll, listen to this, because inner knowing is what guides you now, and your heart needs this right now because intuition speaks softly but firmly. And listen closely, because it doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it simply knows. And don't scroll, listen to this, because that knowing is what's keeping you grounded while they're still processing the collapse of an outdated narrative, and your heart needs this right now because narratives built on assumption don't survive contact with truth. And listen carefully, because truth arrived through your growth, your boundaries, and your refusal to keep explaining yourself. And don't scroll, listen to this, because explanation once felt necessary to be understood, and your heart needs this right now because understanding is no longer something you chase, it's something others must bring to you. And listen closely, because chasing understanding kept you stuck in cycles of overgiving. And don't scroll, listen to this, because overgiving drained you while maintaining the illusion of connection, and your heart needs this right now because illusion fades when clarity arrives. And listen carefully, because clarity doesn't demand a response, it allows one. And don't scroll, listen to this, because allowing is the energy you're holding now, not forcing, not fixing, not proving. And your heart needs this right now because allowing gives the universe room to complete what it started. And listen closely, because completion is approaching, not as an ending necessarily, but as a conclusion to the old dynamic. And don't scroll, listen to this, because conclusions bring relief when they're honest, and your heart needs this right now. Because relief is what your body has been craving more than answers. And listen carefully, because answers don't always heal, but relief does. And don't scroll, listen to this, because relief feels like not needing to check your phone, not replaying conversations, not bracing for disappointment. And your heart needs this right now because those habits belong to a version of you that was still waiting. And listen closely, because waiting implies dependency. And don't scroll, listen to this, because dependency has dissolved, and your heart needs this right now because independence within connection is what healthy love requires. And listen carefully, because independence doesn't mean isolation, it means sovereignty. And don't scroll, listen to this, because sovereignty is what you've stepped into, and your heart needs this right now because sovereign energy cannot be shaken by someone else's emotional reaction. And listen closely, because that's why their shock doesn't pull you backward, it simply registers as information. And don't scroll, listen to this, because information is neutral, it doesn't demand action. And your heart needs this right now because neutrality is what keeps you from being emotionally hijacked. And listen carefully, because emotional hijacking once disguised itself as love, urgency, and intensity. And don't scroll, listen to this, because you can see through that now. And your heart needs this right now because seeing clearly is freedom. And listen closely, because freedom doesn't always feel euphoric, sometimes it feels quiet, steady, and deeply grounded. And don't scroll, listen to this, because grounded energy doesn't rush to resolve other people's discomfort. And your heart needs this right now because their discomfort is part of their awakening, not your responsibility. And listen carefully, because responsibility shifts when boundaries solidify. And don't scroll, listen to this, because boundaries are not walls, they are definitions. And your heart needs this right now because definitions bring clarity to connections. And listen closely, because clarity is what exposes whether something can evolve or must complete. And don't scroll, listen to this, because evolution requires equal effort, not shock alone, and your heart needs this right now because shock can wake someone up, but it doesn't guarantee growth, and listen carefully, because growth requires accountability, action, and consistency, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because those qualities cannot be forced or rescued into someone else, and your heart needs this right now because you are no longer in the role of rescuer, translator, or emotional anchor, and listen closely, because releasing those roles created space for balance, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because balance is what the universe is restoring now. And your heart needs this right now because balance may feel unfamiliar if you're used to emotional extremes, and listen carefully, because unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong, it means new, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because new patterns take time to feel normal, and your heart needs this right now because patience is part of integration, and listen closely, because impatience often comes from fear that something will be lost, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because you're no longer afraid of loss the way you used to be. And your heart needs this right now because fear dissolves when self-trust is strong, and listen carefully, because self-trust is what you've been building quietly all along, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because quiet strength outlasts loud promises, and your heart needs this right now because loud promises once distracted you from consistent behavior, and listen closely, because now behavior matters more than words, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because behavior reveals readiness, not shock, not regret, and your heart needs this right now because readiness is what you are aligned with. And listen carefully, because alignment doesn't negotiate with potential, it responds to reality, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because reality is what's unfolding now, step by step, without drama, and your heart needs this right now because drama once made you feel alive, but peace makes you feel whole, and listen closely, because wholeness is what you carry now, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because wholeness doesn't need to be chosen to be real, it simply is, and your heart needs this right now because from wholeness, any connection that remains must meet you at the same level, and listen carefully, because anything that cannot meet you there will naturally fall away without force, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because falling away doesn't mean failure, it means alignment refining itself, and your heart needs this right now because refinement is part of growth, and listen closely, because growth doesn't stop at awakening, it continues through embodiment. And don't scroll. Listen to this, because embodiment is what you are practicing now, living from truth instead of reacting to triggers, and your heart needs this right now because living from truth stabilizes your future, and listen carefully, because stability is what allows love to be built, not chased, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because building happens slowly, intentionally, and with mutual effort. And your heart needs this right now because you no longer mistake urgency for commitment, and listen closely, because commitment shows up as consistency over time, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because time reveals everything without you having to push, and your heart needs this right now because patience rooted in self-trust is powerful, and listen carefully, because you are no longer waiting for something to happen to feel okay, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because you are okay now, and your heart needs this right now because being okay now changes what the universe brings next, and listen closely, because the cliffhanger here is not what they will do, but how fully you will continue to live from alignment without shrinking back into old patterns, and don't scroll. Listen to this, because the universe is watching not to judge, but to reinforce, and your heart needs this right now because reinforcement solidifies new realities, and listen carefully, Because the reality forming now will not require you to abandon your peace, explain your growth, or manage someone else's emotions. It will meet you where you stand, grounded, clear, and whole, and that is the real completion of this chapter, and the beginning of whatever comes next. Don't scroll, listen to this. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because this is the moment where the universe gently but firmly asks you to stay awake, not alert in fear, but awake in awareness, and listen closely, because what's happening now is subtle yet irreversible, like a door quietly closing behind you while another opens in front of you. And don't scroll, listen to this. Because quiet endings are often the most powerful ones, and your heart needs this right now. Because power doesn't always arrive with noise, sometimes it arrives as peace so deep it feels unfamiliar. And listen carefully, because unfamiliar peace can feel strange if you've lived too long in emotional tension. And don't scroll, listen to this, because tension once kept you engaged, guessing, hoping, waiting, and your heart needs this right now, because you are no longer meant to live in waiting rooms of uncertainty. And listen closely, because waiting implied you were dependent on someone else's decision to move forward. And don't scroll, listen to this, because that dependency has dissolved, and your heart needs this right now, because sovereignty has taken its place. And listen carefully, because sovereignty doesn't isolate you, it stabilizes you. And don't scroll, listen to this, because stability is what allows you to discern clearly without emotional fog. And your heart needs this right now, because discernment is the gift you earn through every confusing chapter. You survived, and listen closely, because confusion was not a failure, it was training. And don't scroll, listen to this, because training ends when mastery begins. And your heart needs this right now, because you are stepping into mastery of your emotional world. And listen carefully, because mastery doesn't control others, it governs the self. And don't scroll, listen to this, because self-governance is what shifted the entire energetic dynamic between you and them. And your heart needs this right now, because you stopped negotiating your worth, your needs, and your peace. And listen closely, because negotiation kept you tethered to outcomes that were never guaranteed. And don't scroll, listen to this, because guarantees are not what aligned love offers, presence is. And your heart needs this right now, because presence is what you embody now. And listen carefully, because presence doesn't rush to resolve discomfort, it allows truth to surface naturally. And don't scroll, listen to this, because allowing truth is what you're practicing now, even when it's uncomfortable. And your heart needs this right now, because discomfort is no longer something you run from, it's something you observe without attaching to. And listen closely, because observation creates space. And don't scroll, listen to this, because space is what breaks emotional loops. And your heart needs this right now, because loops once kept you replaying the same dynamics with different hopes. And listen carefully, because hope without alignment becomes self-betrayal. And don't scroll, listen to this, because self-betrayal is what you ended when you chose clarity over potential. And your heart needs this right now, because potential once kept you emotionally invested in what could be instead of what was. And listen closely, because what was no longer meets who you are. And don't scroll, listen to this, because outgrowing something doesn't make it wrong, it makes it complete. And your heart needs this right now, because completion allows energy to return to you. And listen carefully, because you may have noticed recently that you feel more grounded, less reactive, less pulled by what others think or feel. And don't scroll, listen to this, because that groundedness is not detachment, it's embodiment. And your heart needs this right now, because embodiment means you are fully inhabiting your truth, not hovering above it in fear. And listen closely, because fear once kept you hypervigilant. Scanning for signs, reading between lines, interpreting silence, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you don't do that anymore, and your heart needs this right now because your nervous system has learned that love doesn't require constant vigilance, and listen carefully, because vigilance is a response to instability, not intimacy, and don't scroll, listen to this, because intimacy thrives in safety. And your heart needs this right now because safety is what you prioritize now without apology, and listen closely, because prioritizing safety doesn't make you boring, it makes you available for real connection, and don't scroll, listen to this, because real connection doesn't need to shock your system to feel alive, and your heart needs this right now because calm joy is still joy, and listen carefully, because calm joy is sustainable, and don't scroll, listen to this, because sustainability is what your soul has been asking for all along, even when your ego chased intensity. And your heart needs this right now because ego chasing kept you tied to cycles that looked passionate but felt draining, and listen closely, because draining relationships teach endurance, not fulfillment, and don't scroll, listen to this, because fulfillment feels different, it feels light, expansive, and steady, and your heart needs this right now because you're beginning to taste that steadiness, and listen carefully, because tasting steadiness makes old patterns lose their grip, and don't scroll, listen to this, because once you know how peace feels, you can't unknow it, and your heart needs this right now because knowing changes your tolerance permanently, and listen closely, because tolerance once allowed behavior that didn't honor you, and don't scroll, listen to this, because honor is now non-negotiable, and your heart needs this right now because honor doesn't need to be demanded, it's reflected back when you hold it for yourself, and listen carefully, because holding honor for yourself required you to let go of roles you played to keep others comfortable, and don't scroll, listen to this, because comfort at your expense was never love, and your heart needs this right now because love doesn't ask you to disappear, overextend, or stay silent about your needs, and listen closely, because needs are not burdens, they are boundaries, and don't scroll, listen to this, because boundaries create clarity. And your heart needs this right now because clarity prevents resentment from building silently, and listen carefully, because resentment was the cost of self-suppression, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you are no longer suppressing yourself, and your heart needs this right now because self-expression rooted in truth is freeing, not confrontational, and listen closely, because freedom doesn't mean chaos, it means choice, and don't scroll, listen to this, because choice is what you have now. Real choice, not the illusion of it, and your heart needs this right now because illusion kept you emotionally invested without reciprocity, and listen carefully, because reciprocity is the new baseline, and don't scroll, listen to this, because anything that cannot meet you there will feel immediately misaligned. And your heart needs this right now because misalignment now registers as discomfort instead of desire, and listen closely, because discomfort is information, not a problem, and don't scroll, listen to this, because information guides you forward cleanly, and your heart needs this right now because clean movement doesn't require drama, explanation, or justification, and listen carefully, because justification once kept you stuck, defending choices that didn't honor you, and don't scroll, listen to this, because you no longer need to defend your growth, and your heart needs this right now because growth speaks for itself, and listen closely, because growth doesn't need witnesses to be valid, and don't scroll, listen to this, because validation is internal now, and your heart needs this right now because internal validation is unshakable, and listen carefully, because unshakable energy is what stabilizes your future, and don't scroll, listen to this, because the universe responds quickly to stability, and your heart needs this right now because what's forming next will match the steadiness you hold, and listen closely, because steady energy attracts steady people, and don't scroll, listen to this, because chaos cannot sustain itself in your presence anymore, and your heart needs this right now because that is how you know this chapter is truly ending, not with anger, not with regret, but with calm certainty, and listen carefully, because certainty doesn't need closure conversations to exist, and don't scroll, listen to this, because closure often comes from within when you finally accept what is. And your heart needs this right now because acceptance frees you from the need to control outcomes, and listen closely, because control once felt like safety, but now safety comes from trust, and don't scroll, listen to this, because trust in yourself is what carries you forward without fear, and your heart needs this right now because fear is no longer the narrator of your story, and listen carefully, because you are writing the next chapter from awareness, alignment, and self-respect, and don't scroll, listen to this. Because the cliffhanger here is not whether someone else chooses you, it's how deeply you continue to choose yourself even when old energy tries to pull you back, and your heart needs this right now because you are strong enough, aware enough, and grounded enough to keep moving forward, and the universe is not asking you to look back anymore, it's asking you to stay present, because what's ahead is built on everything you've become, and that foundation is solid, real, and finally ready to hold something lasting. Don't scroll, listen to this message is for you, and your heart needs this right now because this is the moment where everything finally locks in, where the universe stops whispering and starts standing firmly behind you, and listen closely because what's happening now is not emotional noise, it's emotional truth settling into your bones, and don't scroll, listen to this, because this phase is about ownership, owning who you've become, owning the growth you once questioned, owning the strength you didn't realize you were building. And your heart needs this right now because ownership changes how you move through the world, and listen carefully, because when you own your growth, you stop asking for permission to exist at your full capacity, and don't scroll, listen to this, because permission seeking once kept you small, cautious, and overly accommodating. And your heart needs this right now because you are no longer meant to dim yourself to keep others comfortable, and listen closely, because comfort built on your silence was never sustainable, and don't scroll, listen to this, because sustainability is the new standard your soul operates from, and your heart needs this right now because sustainable love, sustainable peace, sustainable joy are what last beyond moments of intensity, and listen carefully, because intensity fades but stability remains, and don't scroll, listen to this, because stability is what you are cultivating now without forcing it, and your heart needs this right now because stability feels calm, grounded, and deeply reassuring, even if part of you still expects chaos out of habit, and listen closely, because habits formed in survival don't disappear overnight, but they lose power when awareness is present, and don't scroll, listen to this, because awareness is what you're practicing now every time you pause instead of react, every time you choose silence over explanation, every time you trust your inner knowing instead of someone else's confusion, and your heart needs this right now because those pauses are rewriting your future, and listen carefully, because pauses create space, and space allows truth to breathe, and don't scroll, listen to this, because truth doesn't need urgency, it needs presence, and your heart needs this right now because presence is what keeps you anchored while everything else finishes rearranging itself, and listen closely, because rearrangement doesn't always come with visible change. right away. Sometimes it comes as an internal shift so deep that the external world has no choice but to follow. And don't scroll, listen to this.